It's 2 a.m. on May 19, 1941. Under the cover of darkness, the mighty battleship Bismarck slips free of her moorings and heads out to sea. The ship is impressive, largest in the entire German fleet, with a displacement of over 50,000 tons, packing 64 guns, with foot-thick armor protecting her from enemy fire. She's headed for the Danish Straits, where she'll be joined by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and her 3-destroyer escort. Overhead, the fearsome Luftwaffe provides air cover, watching over the convoy of ships until they're out of range. Their mission is to slip past British defenses and make for open water in the Atlantic, where they will raid Allied shipping and cripple Britain's ability to continue its war effort. A few days later, though, the German convoy encounters the Swedish cruiser Gotland. Sweden is a neutral nation, and thus the Germans aren't concerned about being attacked by Swedish coastal defenses. But unbeknownst to the Germans, the captain of the Swedish ship radios a report back to naval headquarters, which is passed along to the British naval attaché to Sweden by Swedish officers with sympathies to England. Royal Navy Captain Henry Denham immediately transmits the information to the British Admiralty, who review a report by Allied codebreakers that a raid on the Atlantic was imminent, and realize this is the flotilla en route to wreak hell on British shipping. A pair of submarine Spitfires are quickly ordered into the air over the Norwegian coast to search for the German ships. They must be found immediately, and the ships of convoy, to include the mighty Bismarck, must be sunk at all costs. The very fate of Britain hangs in the balance. The now legendary Bismarck had her keel laid on the 1st of July 1936 in Hamburg, Germany. She was to be a replacement for the old pre-dreadnought SMS Hanover and a counter to the French Richelieu class of battleships. Though on paper she was within 35,000-ton limit imposed by international treaty that governed battleship construction in the period between World War I and World War II. In reality, she far exceeded those limits, though by the time she was completed, the treaty system had fallen apart due to Japan's withdrawal and was not enforced. She would come to displace over 50,000 tons and measure 823 feet, immediately becoming the largest battleship in Europe until the commissioning of the HMS Vanguard by Britain after the end of the war. Her complement included 1,962 enlisted men, overseen by 103 officers, and she could carry 4 Ahado floatplanes for scouting and spotting fire. She had a cruising range of 8,870 nautical miles and could move along at 19 knots, putting much of the Atlantic at risk for the Allies. One of the most formidable ships ever built at the time, the Bismarck sported 8 15-inch guns, arranged in 4 twin gun turrets, with 2 stationed forward and 2 aft. Her secondary armament was made up of 12 5.9-inch guns, 16 4.1-inch guns, and 16 1.5-inch guns, and 12 anti-aircraft guns. Her sides were protected by a belt of armor a foot thick, and her upper and main decks were armored with 2 inches and 3.9 to 4.7 inches of armored plating respectively. Not only could the Bismarck dish out one hell of a pounding, she could take it in return and keep on firing. On the 5th of May 1941, the Bismarck is ordered on a mission to raid Atlantic shipping. German U-boats had been very successful to date, but the British had begun moving their merchant ships in large convoy fleets protected by destroyers and small aircraft carriers. The losses against German U-boats were growing exponentially, but with the Bismarck and her destroyers to support them, the Germans could wreak havoc on British shipping, potentially even ending the war by forcing Britain's surrender. 11 days later, the Bismarck leaves her port in Poland and makes for the Danish Straits, where she's joined by the Prinz Eugen and 3 destroyers, along with a small flotilla of minesweepers. The German mission is so secret that even its crew is unaware of their destination or assignment, and it isn't until noon on May 20th that the crew is told over loudspeaker of the ship's mission. At about the same time, though, a group of Swedish aircraft flying reconnaissance comes across the German fleet, radioing their composition and heading, while remaining unseen by the Germans. 1 hour later, the Swedish cruiser Gotland intercepts the fleet and shadows it for 2 hours as it passes by Swedish territorial waters. The Germans are unconcerned by the Swedish ship, though. Privately, Captain Ernst Lindemann, commanding officer of the Bismarck, fumes that operational secrecy was effectively lost. The Swedes may be neutral, but any stray radio chatter reporting their position could be picked up by Allied spies, and the Germans always suspected that the Swedes harbored many Allied sympathies and could simply give up the ship to the British. Captain Lindemann orders the convoy to increase speed and get out into open water as fast as possible. The quicker they reach the Atlantic, the safer they will be. Back at the British embassy in Sweden, Captain Henry Denham receives an urgent report by a Swedish officer with sympathies to the Allies, exactly as feared by the Germans. Though the Bismarck is not named in the report, what is clear is that a large German force is making for open water, and there can only be two conclusions. The Germans are preparing for a cross-channel invasion of England, or they're moving forces out into the Atlantic in order to cut Britain off from America and the vital war supplies the US is providing. Either possibility spells disaster, and Captain Denham immediately contacts the British Admiralty with this information. Back in England, an intelligence officer confirms that his codebreakers at Bletchley Park had decrypted reports that the Bismarck and Prinz Eugen had taken on prize crews of sailors meant to take over damaged enemy ships and sail them back to friendly waters for repairs, and that their captains had requested additional navigational charts. This could only mean one thing: the long-awaited German push into the Atlantic was finally coming, and leading the offensive was the most feared battleship in Europe. A pair of submarine Spitfires are immediately ordered into the air to search for the German flotilla off the coast of Norway, while at the same time the Germans launched their own aerial reconnaissance mission over the British naval base at Scapa Flow. The Germans discovered that 1 aircraft carrier, 3 battleships, and 4 cruisers are still anchored at Scapa Flow, which confirms their belief that the British are unaware of the Bismarck and her battle group's mission. That night, the Bismarck reaches the Norwegian coast, where her minesweepers, 2 raiders, and their destroyer escorts break off and continue north without her. The next morning, the Prinz Eugen intercepts radio broadcasts ordering British recon aircraft to search for 2 battleships and 3 destroyers northbound off the Norwegian coast, and at 0700 hours, the Germans spot 4 unidentified aircraft believed to be British planes, which immediately depart the area. Shortly after noon, the German destroyers, minesweepers, and raiders reach Bergen and anchor at Grimstadfjord. The Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen, meanwhile, are taking on supplies and fuel, while a pair of Luftwaffe Bf-109 fighters fly overhead to provide air cover. Despite the air cover, though, British flying officer Michael Suckling fires his Spitfire directly over the German flotilla at a height of 26,000 feet and takes photos of the Bismarck anchored alongside her remaining escorts. Managing to break away from the defending German fighters, Suckling makes it back to base, where the pictures are immediately analyzed and a report sent directly to the Admiralty. The British battlecruiser HMS Hood, the battleship Prince of Wales, and 6 destroyers are ordered to reinforce a lone pair of cruisers that are currently the only force patrolling the Denmark Strait. Meanwhile, the British home fleet is put on high alert in Scapa Flow and puts out to sea. The greatest naval battle of the European theater is in the making, with the fate of Britain in the balance. The British immediately dispatch 18 bombers to attack the anchored ships, though as luck would have it, the weather over the fjord where the ships are sheltering worsens considerably, and the bombers are unable to locate the German fleet. The next day, at 1930 hours, the Bismarck, Prinz Eugen, and their 3 destroyer escorts all leave Bergen and put out to sea once more. And it wouldn't be until midnight, when the force was already well out to sea, that Hitler is informed of the raid on the Atlantic. By this time, it has become clear to the German senior command staff that Hitler was no master strategist, despite his proclivity for personally overseeing every aspect of the war effort. Thus, the choice had been made to not let the Führer know of the Bismarck's mission until it was far too late for him to stop it. Thus, grudgingly, Hitler consents, and the Bismarck continues on her way. The next day, at 0410 hours, the 3 escorting destroyers are detached from the fleet as the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen attempt to dash through the Denmark Strait and break out into the open Atlantic. Speed is increased to 27 knots and both ships' radars are activated, potentially giving them away to Allied forces, but also allowing them to monitor any threats bearing down on them. The move is risky, but mists have reduced visibility to between 3,000 and 4,000 meters, which suits the Germans as it provides them with cover from air attack, but could also give that same cover to British ships lying in wait to ambush the 2 German vessels. The mood is tense aboard the Bismarck. If they can break past Iceland, they'll be out into the open Atlantic and safe from British attack. But they're so close to Britain now that any moment these mists could be hiding a British fleet waiting to pounce. At 1000 hours, the Germans encounter ice floes, which force them to reduce speed and adopt a zigzag route through the dangerous icebergs. This further slows their breakout to the North Atlantic. At 1922, hydrophone and radar operators raise the alarm after detecting the HMS Suffolk at a range of approximately 12,500 meters, and the Prinz Eugen's radio intercept team confirms their worst fears. Their location has been reported. The Prinz Eugen is immediately ordered to engage the Suffolk, but through the fog, the Germans are unable to clearly make out their target. Rather than light themselves up and give the British an easier target to spot and fire back at, the Germans hold their fire, while the Suffolk retreats to a safe distance, continuing to shadow the German ships. At 20:30 hours, the heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk joins the Suffolk, but strays too close to the Germans, who immediately open fire. The Bismarck fires 5 salvos from her main gun, 3 of which score hits on the Norfolk, but cause superficial damage. The Norfolk responds by laying down a smoke screen and fleeing into a fog bank to lick its wounds. The opening salvo of Europe's greatest naval battle has officially been fired. The concussion from the big guns of the Bismarck, though, have knocked out her radar set, and the Prinz Eugen is ordered to take points so she can use her own radar to find the British formation, hoping to surprise the British ship shadowing them. The Germans wait until the Bismarck has been overtaken by a rain squall and then put the ship through a 180-degree turn, steaming full speed ahead at the 2 British ships. The surprise attack, however, is defeated by the Suffolk's radar, which easily detects the Bismarck's maneuver despite its heavy rain cover, and the British ships evade the pending attack. The British cruisers remain on station throughout the night, continually relaying the German position to the rest of the British fleet. The Germans know a fight is coming and try to get what rest they can through the stormy weather. The weather finally breaks early on the morning of the 24th of May as hydrophone operators aboard the Prinz Eugen detect a pair of unidentified vessels approaching at high speed. A half-hour later, the German lookouts spot smoke on the horizon, and a few minutes later, the ships are revealed to be the Hood and Prince of Wales. Alarms ring and klaxons sound as the men rush to battle stations, the Bismarck training her big guns on the approaching targets. At 05:52 hours, the Hood opens fire at extreme range, and a salvo of shells explodes in the water around the Prinz Eugen, which the British have mistaken for the Bismarck. The Prince of Wales responds a minute later, firing her own salvo at the Bismarck, though its shells too fall short of their mark. As the British ships approach, they continue raining down fire around the Germans, though the Germans don't respond. Inside the bridge of the Bismarck, 1st Gunnery Officer Adalbert Schneider requests permission to return fire twice, but is denied twice by Admiral Gunther Lütjens, Fleet Chief of the Kriegsmarine. After a few close calls, Captain Lindemann can no longer bear it and mutters, "I will not let my ship be shot out from under my ass," and formally requests permission to return fire from Lütjens, who at last relents. The British ships are approaching head-on, which only lets them use their forward guns. The Germans, meanwhile, are able to bring all of their guns to bear on the British and fire full broadsides. British Vice Admiral Holland orders his ships to turn 20 degrees to port, allowing them to close the distance to the Germans while bringing their rear gun turrets into the fight. Rather than spit their fire like the British, the Germans concentrate their fire on the Hood, and almost immediately after being free to return fire, the Prinz Eugen scores a direct hit with a high explosive shell, starting a large fire. British damage control crews rush to put out a fire that threatens ammo stores and manages to put out the flames before the entire ship goes up in one giant explosion. Unfortunately for the British, though, the Germans have found their range to the Hood, and the Bismarck immediately opens fire with rapid salvos from its main guns. Its secondary guns are ordered to engage the Prince of Wales, scoring 1 or 2 hits with fail to penetrate her heavy armor plating. The Prinz Eugen is then ordered to shift her fire onto the Prince of Wales in order to keep both enemy vessels under fire, and a few minutes later the Prinz Eugen scores 2 direct hits on the British ship, which set off several small fires. The Prinz Eugen then drops behind the Bismarck so that she can use her radar to monitor the location of the Norfolk and Suffolk, which have been shadowing the battle. At 0600 hours, the Bismarck scores a direct hit on the Hood with an armor-piercing shell, which penetrates deep into the bowels of the ship and detonates 112 tons of explosives stored below. A massive explosion immediately breaks the back of the Hood, splitting her into 2 pieces. The battle for the Atlantic has only lasted 8 minutes so far, and already the British have lost 1 ship and 1,419 men. The Bismarck immediately shifts her fire to the Prince of Wales. The British ship is now outnumbered 2 to 1, and the Bismarck manages to score a direct hit with its first salvo, striking the bridge. The round does not explode on impact, but instead passes through the bridge and out the other side, though it kills everyone inside save for Captain John Leach and 1 other officer. Hurt and limping, the Prince of Wales nonetheless returns fire and scores several direct hits on the Bismarck, hitting her on the forecastle and above the torpedo bulkhead and flooding a turbo generator room. A 3rd round passed straight through a lifeboat and the float plane catapult, though it too fails to explode on impact. By 0613, most of the Prince of Wales guns are out of commission, and she's taken very heavy damage. Captain Leach orders the ship to retreat, and she immediately lays out a smokescreen to cover her withdrawal, with the Germans firing the entire way until at last she's out of range. Aboard the Bismarck, Captain Lindemann insists on giving chase and finishing off the heavily wounded British battleship, but Admiral Luchen refuses and quotes operational orders that state the ships must not actively engage any forces not protecting a convoy. At first, the Bismarck doesn't seem to be seriously damaged, but after the Prinz Eugen spots heavy streams of oil on both sides of her wake, the Bismarck is ordered to make for Saint-Nazaire in occupied France for repair. The Prinz Eugen is ordered to detach and commence its attacks on Allied shipping, leaving the Bismarck to steam back to port alone. The Prince of Wales, meanwhile, has joined the Suffolk and Norfolk, which are still shadowing the Germans, though it's ordered to the rear of the formation, given her extensive battle damage. A British flying boat spots the oil slick being left behind by the Bismarck and reports it to the British ships, who report it back to the British Admiralty. Seeing a chance to destroy Germany's most powerful ship, the British order all available ships to give chase, and in total 6 battleships and battle cruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers all begin the hunt for the Bismarck. At 1814 hours, the Bismarck suddenly turns on the 3 British ships and opens fire. The Suffolk, well out of range of its smaller guns, breaks away at higher speeds, though the Prince of Wales, which has repaired 9 of its 10 damaged guns, fires 12 salvos in response. No hits land on either side, though the brief action diverts the British attention and allows the Prinz Eugen to finally break away and head out to the Atlantic. With the Eugen away, the Bismarck turns back and resumes its course to port. She's been damaged and slowed, but it's still steaming along at 28 knots, the maximum speed of the chasing British ships. If she can't be slowed down, the British won't be able to stop her from reaching port, and once under cover from the Luftwaffe, any attempt to sink her would be suicidal. In desperation, the British launch a nighttime strike from the nearby aircraft carrier Victorious, which launches 6 fighters and 9 torpedo bombers. As they approach their target, though, the inexperienced air crews almost attack the Norfolk and a U.S. Coast Guard cutter by accident, and the confusion alerts the Germans to their approach. As the torpedo bombers finally spot the correct target, the Bismarck lowers her guns to maximum depression and opens fire, creating huge splashes in the water path of the incoming bombers, which must fly low in order to release the torpedoes. None of the aircraft are hit, but only 9 of the torpedoes finds its mark, striking amidships along the armored belt that protects the ship. The damage is light, but the stress of evading the incoming torpedoes has caused flooding from the forward shell hole scored earlier by the Prince of Wales. The flooding forces the crew to abandon the port number 2 boiler room and slows the Bismarck down to a speed of 16 knots. By morning of the 25th of May, though, the damage has been largely repaired by damage control crews, and the Bismarck is once more able to steam along at 28 knots. Entering waters known to be prowled by German U-boats, the British are forced to zigzag in order to avoid the lurking threats, which further adds to the Bismarck's growing lead. Successfully breaking radar contact, the Bismarck circles away to the west and then the north, confusing the British, who by this point are low on fuel and desperate to make contact again. Unaware that she has successfully shaken off her pursuers, though, the Bismarck sends a radio message to Naval Group in West Paris, asking for Luftwaffe air support. British codebreakers decrypt the messages and successfully triangulate the location of the Bismarck, though a mistake by the pursuing British puts them on the wrong course for 7 hours, adding even more distance to the Bismarck's lead. The British immediately order every available ship and plane to search for the Bismarck. It's not until 10:30 on the 26th of May that she's spotted again by the U.S. Navy pilot north of Brest. If the Bismarck isn't stopped soon, she'll be in range of friendly U-boats and the Luftwaffe in less than 1 day. Yet most of the British forces were not close enough to stop her. The only possibility to stop the Bismarck lay with the Royal Navy's Ark Royal, a small aircraft carrier equipped with antiquated Swordfish torpedo bomber biplanes. The odds couldn't have been longer, but the chance to sink Germany's most powerful ship and break the back of the German Navy would quickly pass, and so the Swordfish are ordered into the air. Armed with magnetic detonator torpedoes, the Swordfish proceed on a bearing to the Bismarck, but instead encounter the heavy cruiser Sheffield, which has been ordered to shadow the Bismarck, though the pilots were never told. Believing they were at their target, the Swordfish proceed to attack the Sheffield, though the magnetic detonators on the torpedoes fail and the Sheffield is unscathed. Returning to the Ark, the Swordfish are rearmed with contact detonator torpedoes. At 19:10 hours, the flight of 15 Swordfish take to the air, and at 20:47, the attack on the Bismarck begins. Plunging through the growing cloud cover, the small biplanes are raked with anti-aircraft fire, even as the Bismarck fires its main guns on the Sheffield, which is moved into range hoping for a critical hit from a torpedo attack. The first few salvos manage to score hits on the Sheffield though, and the cruiser is forced to retreat under a cover of smoke. The torpedo bombers meanwhile avoid incoming anti-aircraft fire and loose their torpedoes against the Bismarck, which is by now zigzagging violently to avoid the attack. Torpedo after torpedo misses the giant ship until finally two manage to hit, the first doing minor structural damage, but the second explodes on the Bismarck's stern, near the port rudder shaft. The rudder becomes locked in a 12-degree turn, and the Bismarck is no longer able to sail straight, instead sailing in large circles, utterly helpless versus approaching British forces. Whether miracle or luck, the antiquated biplane torpedo bombers have managed to do what the most modern British ships couldn't, and now the Bismarck's fate is sealed. Aboard the Bismarck, Admiral Lutchen sends a radio dispatch to Fleet Headquarters at 2140. The message simply reads, "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." Her crew, fully cognizant of their fate, grow increasingly depressed, yet remain committed to fight to the last. At 22:38, a group of 5 British destroyers encounter the Bismarck, only to be greeted with heavy fire from her main guns. The Polish destroyer ORP Piorun takes a direct hit, yet continues to close defiantly until a near miss at 12,000 meters forces her to turn away. Stuck making slow circles, the Bismarck is unable to maneuver, and throughout the night the British destroyers dart in and out, harassing her with fire until daybreak. At sunrise, the British battleship King George V leads the final attack on the Bismarck. Within minutes, the King George is exchanging fire with the Bismarck, its big 16-inch guns raining fire down around her. For her part though, the Bismarck immediately scores several hits on the British destroyer Rodney, though the increasingly heavy seas and her inability to steer is making it difficult to aim her guns properly. Closing in, the attacking ship's secondary batteries open fire, joining their 8-inch guns to the fight. At 0902 hours, a 16-inch shell from the Rodney strikes the Bismarck's forward superstructure, immediately killing hundreds of men and severely damaging the 2 forward turrets. Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutjens, along with the rest of the bridge staff, are instantly killed. The Bismarck is now without a captain and with her 2 main guns severely damaged. Moments later, another salvo strikes the forward main battery, and it's unable to fire again, save for one final salvo at 0927 hours. By 0931, all 4 main batteries are severely damaged and out of action, smoke and fire pouring over her deck. By 1000 hours, the British are at point-blank range and have fired over 700 shells. The Bismarck has been reduced to a mangled, smoking mess of steel wreckage, yet the British continue firing. They've been ordered not to stop until the ship strikes her colors or lowers her flag in surrender. It becomes clear that the men are abandoning ship. Orders are given by the surviving officers to scuttle the Bismarck, and scuttling charges are planted in the depths of her hull. By 1020 hours, the British have now fired over 2,800 shells at the Bismarck, most at close range, and yet still failed to sink her. With British ships running low on fuel, the cruiser Dorsetshire is ordered to sink the Bismarck with torpedoes, and the rest of the ships are sent back to port. The Dorsetshire scores 2 direct hits with its torpedoes on the Bismarck's starboard side, and 2 more hits on its port side, and at last the incredible ship slips beneath the waves. Out of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 would survive, but the Bismarck itself would endure as a testament to German engineering and combat prowess. Struck over 700 times, it took 4 direct hits by torpedoes at close range to at last send the mighty ship to the bottom. And after such a staggering combat action, it becomes clear why the British feared what would happen if the Bismarck had ever made it to the open Atlantic and been let loose upon their merchant shipping fleet. If you managed to get all the way, congrats! Now go watch our other video, the most intense tank battle in history, the Battle of 73 Easting.